The morning I walked back into Millhaven, I counted every crack in the sidewalk just to keep my hands from shaking. 22 cracks between the parking lot and the front door of Hargrove and Sons Funeral Home. I know because I counted twice. My mother had been dead for 4 days. I had known about it for 3. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, the only person in that town who still had my number, called me on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Eleanor, your mother passed this morning. The service is Saturday." Then she paused, and I could hear her breathing, and she said, very quietly, "I thought you should know. Whatever you decide." Whatever I decided. I stood in my kitchen in Columbus for a long time after that call. My husband was in the living room, reading. He looked up when I didn't come back. He saw my face and put the book down without a word. His name is Daniel. He has been my husband for 3 years and my person for 6. He is patient in a way that used to confuse me, because I grew up in a house where patience was not something men offered freely. Where men offered things, there was always a price attached. Always a condition. Always a door that could be closed at any moment if you stopped being useful. But that is a different part of the story. My mother died, I told him. He crossed the room and held me. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say anything for a while. He just held me while I stood very still and tried to figure out what I actually felt. What I felt was complicated. What I felt was 29 years of complicated stacked on top of each other like paper in a file cabinet, and somewhere at the very bottom of that cabinet was a little girl who just wanted her mother to come find her, and she never did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tell me, have you ever had to grieve someone who wasn't fully yours to grieve? Someone whose loss is real and enormous, but whose life had a whole other half you weren't part of? That was my mother. She loved me. I believe that. I have to believe that. But she loved my father more, or maybe she feared him more, and in the end, the difference didn't matter. My father's name is Gerald Morrow. In Millhaven, Ohio, he is a significant person. He owns 3 car dealerships, sits on the city council, and has had the same group of friends since high school friends, who happen to include the county sheriff, the head of the local zoning board, and the pastor of the largest church in town. In Millhaven, Gerald Morrow is a pillar. In our house, behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. I left when I was 19. Not kicked out. I want to be precise about that, because there is a difference, and the difference mattered to me for a long time. I left on my own 2 feet, with a bag I had packed over 3 weeks, a little money I had saved from a part-time job he didn't know about, and a plan I had built in secret. He didn't throw me out. He made staying so unbearable that leaving felt like the only breath of air available. I walked out on a Thursday morning before he was awake. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I couldn't risk it. I knew if I woke her, she would cry, and if she cried, she might say something to him, and if she said something to him, the door would close before I reached it. I have thought about that choice almost every day since. For the first 2 years, I was genuinely just surviving. I had a cousin in Columbus who let me sleep on her couch. I got a job at a shipping warehouse, then a better job at an office supply company, then slowly, over time, something that looked like a life. I got my GED, then a community college degree, then a job in medical billing that paid enough to matter. I did not contact my family. I told myself it was for safety. Later, I admitted it was also for survival of a different kind, the emotional kind, the kind where you know that one phone call to the wrong person could undo years of careful reconstruction. My mother found me when I was 24. She had hired someone, a small-time private investigator, the kind that advertises on local cable, and he had found me through my cousin. She called my cell phone on a Sunday afternoon. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. "Eleanor," she said. "It's Mom." We talked for 47 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone after we hung up and just stared at the number. 47 minutes. She cried for most of it. She told me she thought about me every day. She told me things at home were the same. She told me she was sorry in the vague, shapeless way that people apologize when they are sorry but not sorry enough to change anything. She asked me not to call the house. She said she would call me. She called every few weeks after that, always from her cell phone, always when he wasn't home. We talked about small things, her garden, the neighbors, my work, whether I was eating enough. We never talked about why I left. We never talked about him in any real way. We had an agreement, unspoken, that if we kept the conversation small enough, it could survive. I accepted those terms. I am not entirely proud of that, but I accepted them because half of her was better than none of her, and I was so tired of none. That went on for 10 years. 10 years of small phone calls and careful boundaries, and the low hum of grief that never quite went away. And then my aunt called on a Tuesday. And my mother was gone, and I had 4 days to decide whether to walk back into Millhaven. Daniel sat with me at the kitchen table that night. He brought tea, neither of us drank. We talked until almost 2 in the morning. He asked me what I wanted, not what I should do. Not what made sense, not what the situation required. What did I want? I want to say goodbye to her, I said. Then we go, he said. I looked at him. You don't know what you're agreeing to. He gave me a look that I have come to recognize over 6 years. Calm, direct, with a kind of quiet certainty underneath it. I know who your father is. I know what that town looks like. I've read everything you've ever told me about it. He folded his hands on the table. And I'm telling you, we go. Because you deserve to say goodbye to your mother. And because you won't be going alone. What I had not told him, what I had not told almost anyone, was what Daniel did for a living. He worked for the federal government. Specifically, he worked as a senior investigator for the Office of Inspector General, a division that handles fraud, financial misconduct, and corruption in federally funded programs. He was very good at his job. He was also, by nature and by training, the kind of person who prepared for things well in advance and never walked into a room without knowing exactly what was in it. I did not know yet how relevant that would become. We drove to Millhaven on Friday afternoon. The town looked smaller than I remembered, which people always say, and which is always true in a way that feels personal, like the place itself has been diminished by your absence from it. The streets were the same. The hardware store on Main was still there. The diner where I used to do homework after school was still there. My father's biggest dealership, the one with the giant American flag out front, was still there. Bigger, actually. He'd added a second lot. We checked into a motel 20 minutes outside of town. I didn't want to stay with my aunt, didn't want to subject her to whatever was coming, and I knew something was coming. My father had known I was coming. My aunt had told me she couldn't keep it from him, that he'd asked directly, and she wasn't willing to lie to his face. So he knew. And Gerald Morrow was not a man who let things happen to him. He arranged things. He positioned things. He made sure that when a situation arose, he already had the high ground. I had grown up watching him do it. I knew the pattern better than almost anyone. The service was at 11 on Saturday morning at the church he had attended for 40 years. The same pastor, the same front row pew that was understood by everyone in that congregation to belong to the Morrow family. I wore a navy dress. I did my makeup carefully. I had learned a long time ago that composure was armor, and I put it on like armor. Daniel wore a suit, dark gray. He looked like what he was, a serious, capable man, but he had left everything else in the car. The church was crowded. My mother had been well liked in that community, in the way that wives of prominent men often are, gently, at a distance, with a kind of respectful pity underneath. People knew she had a daughter who had gone away. That was the language. Gone away. As if I had left for college and just never come back. As if the leaving had been neutral and mutual. I felt the stares when I walked in. I had expected them. I kept my eyes forward. My father was in the front pew. He turned when I came in. Our eyes met across the church, and the expression on his face was something I had to file away and deal with later, because processing it in the moment would have broken my composure entirely. It was not grief. It was not surprise. It was the expression of a man who had been waiting, and who had decided he was ready. I sat in the third row. My aunt found us and sat beside me. She took my hand. She didn't say anything. The service was long. The pastor spoke about my mother's kindness, her devotion, her decades of service to the church community. All of it was true. None of it was the whole truth. That is the nature of eulogies. I suppose they are portraits painted from one angle. I held it together through the service. I held it together through the drive to the cemetery. I held it together at the graveside, standing at the edge of the gathered crowd with Daniel next to me, watching them lower my mother into the ground. I held it together. And then the service ended, and people began moving toward the cars, and I felt him before I saw him, the crowd parting. The particular quality of silence that follows a man who is accustomed to spaces clearing for him. Gerald Morrow stopped 3 feet in front of me. Up close, he was older, which shouldn't have surprised me, and somehow did. 71 years old. Still large, still with that particular way of standing that takes up more space than the body technically requires. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "You have some nerve. Not hello. Not I see you've come. Not even an acknowledgement that we were standing at his wife's grave. Just, you have some nerve," I said. "I came to say goodbye to my mother." "Your mother," he repeated, in a tone that put quotation marks around the words, as if the relationship itself were in dispute. "Yes," I said. "My mother, who I spoke to every few weeks for the last 10 years, who called me on my birthday, who told me, the last time we spoke, that she loved me. So yes, my mother." Something shifted in his face. He hadn't known about the calls. My mother had been more careful than he realized. He recovered quickly. That was one of his skills. "You're not named in her arrangements," he said. "There's nothing here for you. I suggest you get back in whatever car you drove here in and go back to wherever you've been." "I'm not here for arrangements," I said. "I'm here for the funeral, which is a public event, at a public cemetery." "I can make your visit very uncomfortable," he said quietly. "This is still my town." And there it was. That sentence that had lived in my chest for 29 years like a splinter, the sentence underneath every other sentence he had ever said to me. This is still my town, meaning the rules here are mine. The people here are mine. You are subject to me here whether you like it or not. I had prepared for this. I want to be honest, I had thought about this moment, in various forms for a long time. Not fantasized exactly. Prepared. The way you prepare for weather you know is coming. "I know," I said simply. "I know it's your town." He studied me. He had expected more resistance, or more fear, and the absence of it unsettled him slightly, though he hid it well. "Then we understand each other," he said. He began to turn away. "I also know," I said, "that you've been running your dealership's service departments as warranty reimbursement operations for federally backed auto loans for at least the last 6 years. I know about the Riverside contract. I know about the county fleet billing. I know the numbers and I know they don't match." He went completely still. The people nearest us had stopped moving. There were maybe 8 people within earshot. My aunt, 2 of my mother's friends, a man I didn't recognize, the pastor at a slight distance. They were all very still. "That's a serious accusation," my father said. His voice was level. "Good control, from someone with no standing to make it." "It's an observation," I said. "I work in financial compliance. I've worked in it for 11 years. I know what patterns look like." I paused. "And I know that the Office of Inspector General has been receiving information about irregularities in federally backed automotive contracts in this county for the better part of 2 years. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You have nothing," he said. "I have a very thorough husband," I said. He looked at Daniel for the first time. Daniel looked back at him with the particular calm of a man who has spent 15 years interviewing people who have done things they should not have done. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. My father turned back to me. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible, if you knew what to look for. Threat assessment, risk mapping. He was deciding how hard to push and in what direction. He decided to push hard. He turned to the man I hadn't recognized, a heavy-set man in a dark jacket who had been standing slightly apart from the other mourners, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The man walked toward us. He reached into his jacket and produced a badge. County Sheriff's Office. Deputy. He was young, maybe 30, and he had the look of someone carrying out instructions he had received before the service started. "Ma'am," he said to me, "I'm going to need you to come with me." I felt the cold run through me, that old animal response, the one my body still remembered even when my mind had moved on. I breathed through it. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Disorderly conduct complaint," he said, "causing a disturbance at a private funeral service." "This is a public cemetery," I said. "The family has made a complaint. I would like to see that complaint in writing." He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know about how prepared he actually was for pushback. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Not between us, just forward. "Deputy," he said, in a voice that was professionally courteous in a way that somehow made it more serious rather than less. "I want to make sure you're aware of a few things before you proceed. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm a senior investigator with the Office of Inspector General, Federal Appointment, Midwest Regional Division." He produced his credentials from his jacket pocket. He had put them there that morning, I realized. He had put them there on purpose, easily accessible, because he had known something like this might happen. My wife has committed no violation that I've observed. She's standing in a public cemetery, having a conversation. The deputy looked at the credentials. He looked at my father. He looked back at the credentials. "Additionally," Daniel continued, still in that same measured tone, "I'd like you to consider carefully what it looks like for a sheriff's deputy to remove a woman from her own mother's funeral at the request of her father, in front of witnesses, within 20 minutes of that woman making statements about potential federal financial violations. Because that is the sequence of events that will be in my report." His report. Not a threat, not a raised voice, just a clean, precise description of cause and effect, delivered by a man who writes reports for a living and whose reports carry federal weight. The deputy did not move. My father's jaw was very tight. He said nothing. "I think," Daniel said pleasantly, "that everyone here has had a very hard morning. It might be worth letting the moment settle." The deputy stepped back. He didn't leave. He wasn't going to fully back down in front of the crowd, but he stepped back, and the immediate pressure released. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not contempt, something closer to recalculation. "This isn't finished," he said. "I know," I said. "But today is finished. Today is about my mother." He left. He walked back to his car with the careful deliberateness of a man controlling his exit. His friends followed. The deputy drifted away. The gathered crowd stood there in the Ohio sunshine and the uncomfortable silence of people who have just witnessed something they'll be talking about for years. My aunt squeezed my arm so hard it left a mark. Later, at the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the shaking I had been holding back all day finally move through me. Not fear, exactly. Not relief. Something in between. Something without a clean name. Daniel sat beside me. He didn't say anything for a while. "I need you to know," I said finally, "that I didn't marry you for the badge." He laughed. It was the right response. "I know," he said. "You married me for my cooking. Your pasta is very good." "It is," he agreed. The investigation, the actual investigation, had been ongoing before I ever walked back into Millhaven. Daniel had been careful about that. Careful to keep his personal life entirely separate from his professional one. Careful that nothing I told him about my father over 6 years of marriage could be construed as the origin of an inquiry. The paper trail had been built from public records, from contractor filings, from patterns that exist independent of anything I said or know. That was important. That was how it had to be. I was not the one who brought my father down. I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear because I am not interested in a story where the daughter is rescued by her husband's power, where the victory belongs to someone else by virtue of his credentials. That is not what happened. What happened is that a man who had operated for decades in a small town, insulated by relationships and local influence, had not understood that the world outside his town does not share that insulation. What happened is that federal oversight does not care who you know on the city council, does not care that the sheriff is your golf partner, does not care about the particular geography of your importance. What happened is that I survived. I built a life. I married a good man who happened to have a certain kind of job, and that job turned out to be relevant, but the relevance was incidental. The foundation was the surviving. My mother left me a letter. It was held by her attorney, her own attorney, one my father didn't know she had, retained 6 years ago with money from a small account he also didn't know about. The attorney called me the following Monday. We met at a coffee shop outside Millhaven. He handed me an envelope with my name on it, in her handwriting, and I sat in that coffee shop for a long time before I opened it. She wrote that she was sorry. Not in the shapeless, vague way she'd apologized on the phone. This was different. This was specific. She named things. She described things. She said she knew she had failed me in ways she could not undo, and that she had lived with that knowledge for 29 years, and that the only thing she had ever done that she was proud of, besides me, was making sure that there was something she could leave me that he could not contest. There was a small amount of money, not life-changing, but meaningful, transferred through a legal instrument that my father had no access to and no standing to challenge because it had never been in their joint estate. She had been quietly, patiently building it for years. She had also left me something else. A document, a written account, witnessed and notarized, of specific incidents in our household over specific years. Dates, details. Her own testimony about her own life and marriage, written clearly and preserved carefully. She left it to me because she knew I would know what to do with it. The attorney told me she had updated the document 18 months ago. He told me she had seemed, in their last meeting, at peace. I drove back to the motel and sat in the parking lot and cried for the first time since she died. Not the controlled, managed grief I had been carrying since Tuesday. The real kind. The messy, non-photogenic kind. The kind that is also gratitude, also love, also the unbearable sadness of understanding that someone did their best, and it wasn't enough, but it also wasn't nothing. Daniel sat with me. He held my hand. He let me cry for as long as I needed to. There are things I cannot tell you about what happened next, about the investigation, about my father, about the timeline of whatever is still ongoing. I can tell you that the document my mother left, combined with what Daniel's office had already built, combined with the very public incident at the cemetery that several witnesses later described in detail, all of it changed the shape of the situation considerably. I can tell you that a man who has operated for decades as the unchallenged authority in a small town is not immune to the world outside that town. That insulation has limits. That is not justice. Maybe justice would have come sooner, would have protected more people, would not have required my mother to spend decades in a quiet, Careful act of preparation just to leave her daughter something no one could take away. That is not justice, but it is something. What I carried out of Millhaven, besides the letter and the document and the numb, heavy weight of having said goodbye too late, what I carried out was this. I had walked into my father's territory, the town he had made his domain, and I had stood in a cemetery next to my mother's grave and told him the truth to his face. I had not shouted. I had not collapsed. I had not needed his permission or his validation or his acknowledgement to exist in that space. I had simply been there, present, intact. My mother always told me, in those small phone calls over those 10 years, that I was stronger than I knew. She said it in the way mothers say things they hope will eventually become true. But she also said it, I think, because she had watched me survive the things she couldn't survive, and she needed to believe that survival had made me something. She was right. It had. I am not going to tell you that I forgave my father that day. I don't think forgiveness is a box you check or a thing that happens in a single moment at a cemetery. I think it's something longer and more complicated, something that may or may not arrive over years, something that I am not responsible for rushing. What I will tell you is that I drove back to Columbus on Sunday morning with my husband beside me and the windows down and the Ohio summer coming in, and I felt for the first time in a very long time that I was not running. I was not running from anything. I was just going home. And that, in the end, was the whole of the victory. Not the badge, not the investigation, not the look on my father's face when the calculation stopped working. The victory was that I had a home to go back to, a life I had built from nothing, from a Thursday morning and a packed bag and pure stubbornness. A man who put his credentials in his jacket pocket and drove with me to a town he'd never been to because I needed to say goodbye to my mother, a self that was still standing. If you are in a version of this story right now, earlier in the story, in the part where the ending isn't visible yet, I want to say this directly. The distance you put between yourself and the thing that hurt you is not defeat. Sometimes it is the longest, most necessary preparation. Sometimes the 10 years of phone calls in secret is how you get to the letter. Sometimes you have to survive first, and everything else comes after. My mother survived as best she could. I survived better. Maybe the people who come after me will have an easier time surviving still. That is how the math has to work. That is the only answer that makes it mean anything. I am Eleanor Reyes. I was 19 when I left and 38 when I went back, and I am still here. That's the story.